I met my wife 15 years ago and we instantly fell in love. After 4 years, we got married and we now have a 7-year-old son. Over the past couple of years, my wife began displaying signs of unhappiness, but we always tried to address our issues. After becoming a mother, she stopped working to focus on our son. During summers, she would visit her hometown by the sea to escape the heat in our city. As the years went by, this started to become a challenge as it meant I saw our son less and constant travel wasn't easy. After last summer, my wife became more vocal about our problems, but I couldn't understand. We always try to work through our issues, but this time it seemed she didn't want to find a resolution. She initiated heated arguments in front of our son and expressed a desire for a divorce. Simultaneously, she started being evasive about her whereabouts, returning home late, and even adding a password to her phone. In the first week of December, she initiated divorce proceedings without informing me and obtained a restraining order with the help of a lawyer. I never threatened or harmed her, so there wasn't a valid reason for such an order. However, our laws permit women to obtain these orders without substantial evidence. Consequently, I began staying with my brother and sought legal counsel. According to the law, I had approximately 6 weeks to respond to my wife's initial petition. During this time, I began asking my son questions about his mother, where they went, who they met, and so on. Some of his answers mentioned his best friend's father. However, I didn't attach much significance to it, as his wife was essentially my wife's best friend, and the restaurant they frequented was a place we often visited together. The man was familiar with the restaurant, the owner, and the staff, so I dismissed it as a coincidence. Similar coincidences had occurred in the past. Additionally, this man, along with his wife and their son, had been to our house. We had gone on vacations together, and he knew me quite well. We even went out for drinks, just the two of us, on several occasions. Therefore, I didn't find it suspicious. After she initiated divorce proceedings, I began searching for ways to find out what she was up to. She stopped informing me about her whereabouts and activities. On a couple of occasions, I went to our street, only to find the lights off. My son's tablet was linked to my account, and I could see its location. However, it was usually at home, offline, or at a few places I recognized it didn't have a SIM card. That one evening, it displayed an unfamiliar location. The neighborhood primarily had bars and restaurants. I went there directly and observed from outside, and I saw them: my wife, my son, and the father of my son's best friend. I didn't go inside, but I promptly called my brother. He advised me to remain calm, take photos, and observe from a distance. And that's exactly what I did. Before this incident, I had asked my wife to have lunch with me to discuss matters. I hoped we could resolve or gain a better understanding of the issues during this lunch. I decided to stick to the plan regardless. So we met, had lunch, and she was rather firm. She didn't want to reconcile. As we were leaving, she went to the restroom and left her bag with me. I checked her phone and the man's name was saved as his name, Cherry Blossom. I was certain. Realizing what was happening, I began seeking more evidence and I found it. He had once picked up my wife and my son in a taxi from our home. They had even gone to at least one hotel together along with my son. I shared this information with my lawyers. They conducted their own investigation and confirmed the affair. About 3 weeks later, my lawyer contacted her lawyer to inform them that we had learned about the affair. Prior to this, my wife insulted me and my family daily. She would ask me to spend time with our son, as she wanted to be with her lover. Her demands in the divorce petition were extensive. She wanted me to cover rent, utilities, gas for her car, all expenses for our son, and a substantial amount of alimony, approximately twice the minimum wage. In addition to all this, after that call, she stopped communicating with me for a few days. I suppose she was embarrassed to talk to me. 5 to 6 days later, she sent a message saying that our son was in the hospital. I called her but didn't initially mention the affair. After a few days, she expressed a desire to talk. When we met, she immediately apologized and said she didn't want a divorce. She claimed there was nothing between them. I gave her some hints about the evidence I had, leaving her with no response. She stated she would withdraw the case, and she did within 2 days. Simultaneously, she went back to her hometown. For a month, our conversations were mostly about our son. She didn't speak much with me otherwise. I traveled to her city, spoke with her, expressed my desire for a divorce, and presented my conditions. In response, she threw her coffee at me and left. After her departure, I called the man and yelled at him. Just then, my wife's brother happened to be passing by the coffee shop. He approached and asked why I was shouting. I told him his sister was having an affair. He said he knew. I also spoke with my wife's father, along with my brother-in-law, refraining from mentioning the affair, and said it was his daughter's fault. However, they couldn't convince her to return. A few days later, I called her father and disclosed everything about the affair. He is a hot-tempered individual and he threw her out. So she returned home with her mother. Although the restraining order had expired, I still stayed at my brother's. 3 to 4 days later, I picked up my son and we went to watch a football game. During the game, my wife's mother sent me a message, saying she was heading back to her hometown and it had nothing to do with me. She felt her daughter hadn't learned her lesson. I called my wife and she confirmed she had left. As I was returning to drop off our son, my wife called and she was going to her mother's cousin's place, along with her mother, and they would spend the night there. I informed her that her mother had already left. She was quite furious. Following this, I started staying at home again. She found a job and we hired a nanny for our son. For a few weeks, things were relatively okay. We even kissed and hugged each other. However, 3 weeks later, I lost my job due to a lack of concentration, likely stemming from the divorce and the affair. This made me very angry, and I asked her to leave our home. She started staying at the nanny's house, which was only 5 minutes away, but she also came to our home almost every day. After about 5 days, I saw messages on her phone between her and her lover. She found a place to stay, but her salary was quite low, and it wasn't enough to cover her expenses and her salary at all. During this time, she could pick up our son whenever she wanted, and he mostly stayed with her on weekends. Incidentally, I need to mention the lover's wife. They got divorced, but they lived together for a while. One day, I saw her in front of our son's school, and I discovered she was aware of the affair as well. She learned about it after their divorce. She tried to contact my wife, but she didn't respond. She kicked her ex-husband out of their home. She told me she had suspicions before the divorce, but she didn't take any action because she had wanted the divorce for the last few years. She told me about some of her suspicions, and I verified that they were accurate. 2 months later, my wife took our son but didn't respond to my calls over the weekend. On Monday, she blocked me. I couldn't reach her, but I learned she had returned to her hometown. She filed for divorce again, but due to legal restrictions, she couldn't reference any of the reasons, accusations, or events from the initial case. So she had nothing to use against me. It was simply that she didn't love me anymore and didn't want to remain married. I countered with allegations of infidelity. Note that a romantic affair and an affair involving intimacy have different consequences under our laws. For 4 months, I couldn't see my son. At this moment, we are still looking at an 18-month-long divorce case. She now says she will agree to all the compensation I'm seeking for the divorce. To the second story now. This poignant tale follows a devoted couple, parents to 2 children, one of whom faces unique challenges due to a mental disability. Their lives take an unexpected turn when the husband, an esteemed educator, forms a questionable connection with a young girl, setting off a chain of events that strain their decades-long marriage. As trust wavers and emotions run high, the wife grapples with her husband's actions, leading to a pivotal decision that will shape their future. This narrative explores themes of betrayal, forgiveness, and the intricate dynamics within a family. Before we dive in, I invite you to show your support by hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel. Now let's embark on this story together. We have 2 children, aged 21 and 16, with the youngest being mentally disabled. We've been together for 30 years and married for 24. For context, my husband is a teacher, and last year he got involved with a girl under 16 years old. He claimed there was nothing sexual, but she looks like a Russian prostitute. At the beginning of the last school year, the girl who had left my husband's school came to see him, proposing to have lunch with him and one of his colleagues. Since the colleague couldn't make it, he went alone and of course invited her. I was at the physiotherapist due to a work accident for a year and a half. He told me about it some time later and I was upset. I told him I was not at all okay with it. However, he had lunch with her 4 to 5 times after that, always alone without telling me. One small detail. He had suggested in June-July that she could be our babysitter for our disabled child, who is a few months older than her. I had told him that in that case I wanted to meet her before making a decision, but that I would be the one to take her home. He wanted to let the wolf into the sheepfold, and conveniently, nobody mentioned her anymore, even though her name was frequently brought up at that time. But oh well. So, after their solo lunch dates, he wanted to take her flying because he is a pilot. I firmly forbade him, telling him that he didn't have the parents' consent, and if anything happened to them, he would be in big trouble. He responded that if they crashed in the plane, he wouldn't have a problem because he would be dead. However, I told him that I and his children would pay for it for the rest of our lives. But, as always, he listened to me and waited until I was forced to go to Paris to find an apartment for our first child, to entrust our disabled child to friends, so he could go flying with his Russian girl. And of course he went alone. In October 2016, he told me he didn't love me anymore and wanted a divorce. I went through 15 horrible days begging him not to. He took me back for a week and then it happened again. Then one Friday evening, he came home yelling at me, saying that since I didn't want to divorce and he didn't want to be responsible, we wouldn't divorce anymore. So I asked him why this changed, and that's just how it was. On Tuesday at noon, we had our disabled child's Christmas meal at the center. I had taken the afternoon off to be there, and my husband wasn't working. But of course he needed me to drive him to work because he absolutely had to meet with a parent, so I told him for the umpteenth time that he was lying to me. But no, I was crazy, seeing evil everywhere. He had told me, but I had again forgotten. That evening, after eating and putting everyone to bed and having a big hug, he told me he needed to talk to me and that it was serious. So, it was in December that he told me he had been questioned by the police at noon, not a parent-teacher meeting, and either the mother or the girl had filed a complaint for corrupting a minor. My world completely fell apart. At that moment, he confessed that he had had lunch with her 4 or 5 times during the day, that when I was in Paris and he went flying, he wasn't alone, and another time when I was in Paris in November to see a specialist for my work accident and for our sick child's follow-up at Necker, he supposedly went to the cinema alone, but in fact, he had taken her to the restaurant our first child likes and to the movies. When I asked him why he did this, he said he wanted to help her. So, I exploded, telling him that under our own roof, he had a disabled child the same age he could help instead of this bimbo. Considering his professional situation, he was taking a huge risk. In the end, it was the mother who filed the complaint, supposedly for money. The police informed my husband's school director, and they questioned him and asked him to inform my husband that he was summoned the same Friday when he didn't want to divorce anymore. But the cop had more urgent case, and postponed it to the Tuesday of the Christmas meal. When he was summoned, he mentioned that for the first appointment, his colleague was supposed to be there, but she didn't show up. So, the police called her in for questioning as well. It was she who told him that he better tell me that evening, otherwise she would tell me because she considers me as her sister. So, at that moment my questions were, would he have told me if his colleague hadn't forced him to? The 2 times he left me, was it not to be with the girl? And if he took me back on Friday, was it not to show that he had a perfect family for the cops? From there, he said he would talk to a couple of friends who are both principals to get their opinions, because I told him that what he did was not normal at all. He never talked to them about it. And I wanted him to tell our eldest before she found out from someone else. Of course he would tell her, but not at that moment because she was in exams. Time passed, I stayed with him, but I was under pressure waiting for the verdict. And he kept telling me he was calm. He knew what he had done, and I forgave during that time. Conveniently, all his Facebook, Messenger, and text conversations were deleted. So I didn't know what they were saying. He had a problem with his computer and had to reformat it, and his phone had a glitch, same story. The verdict came in February 2017, case closed. From there, he bragged that he hadn't done anything, he just wanted to help. But that anyway, if there hadn't been the complaint, he wanted to cut ties with her because he was getting too attached. But I didn't understand because there was nothing sexual. Of course. So, I never knew what really happened because there was no written police report. My friend who is his colleague didn't have one either. I know from her that the girl accused him of kissing her, grabbing her by the hips and caressing her thigh. He denies everything. Result: when we talked to our eldest, she got angry with her father, telling him she had warned him to stop his nonsense because being 400 miles away from us, she had heard about the girl and looked at her Facebook account and saw a photo taken from the plane where she recognized her father's hands. So I exploded again because despite my warnings, I was crazy seeing evil everywhere, and despite her own daughter's warnings, he continued anyway. A little reminder of the law. Given his status, he risked being expelled from the education system, fined €150,000, and sentenced to 7 years in prison. But no, Mr. had a clear conscience, he knew what he had done. You're not going to make me believe that you would risk all that just to help someone? And me, like an idiot, I forgave everything. I was recovering slowly from depression. In July, we went on vacation for 15 days. He didn't do anything with us, we were like roommates, while for me it was an opportunity for us to reconnect. So, I wrote him a letter explaining that I wanted us to rediscover each other. When I returned, I didn't get a response to my letter, and he didn't want to talk about it. So, a week later, I initiated the discussion to ask him what had shocked him in my letter. The only response I got was that he didn't love me anymore. He couldn't stand my nasty character, and the spark was gone. So, I told him that after 30 years and all we had been through, it was normal, but it was up to us to rekindle that flame. The next day, when I came home from work, he asked me if it was me or him who was leaving because he needed to fake. Since he was on vacation and our disabled child too, it was simpler not to uproot her from her home, so I left. The first night, I slept in my car, and the following nights at my friend's place, his colleague, but he never wanted me to come back since August. I only saw my disabled child on Wednesday afternoons and from Friday to Saturday when he let me have the house twice, and once for a week at my friend's because she wasn't there. And for the past month and a half, I've had an apartment, so I have her every other week. Despite his request for separation, he hasn't taken any steps. I'm the one who contacted a lawyer, had the house appraised, which we haven't finished paying for, and we signed a sales agreement yesterday. I requested a fast-track divorce by mutual consent, but I'm not sure if I did the right thing, considering all he put me through, and still continues to do. I learned that during our 15-day truce that he asked for 3 weeks after he ejected me from his life, he registered on a dating site. Apparently, for the past 20 years, he should have already divorced because I was tyrannical, and when our eldest was 6 years old, allegedly smashed her head on the floor, which is why she doesn't want to talk to me now. However, she told me that I could forget about her because of my shitty behavior. She doesn't understand that I was angry and stressed for all those months when my husband lied to me and called me crazy, even though I knew something was going on. On the other hand, she doesn't want to see the harm her father did with this minor compared to me. And tonight, from his own mouth, I learned that from the sale of the house, he's going to invest in buying an apartment. So, I told him I don't know how he's going to be able to do that because at best, we would each have 50,000, and he said logically, he would get the whole amount because he bought the land with his parents' estate. So as the law states, the owner of the land owns what's above and below it. It all depends on the notary's decision during the divorce by mutual consent. My husband was a big spender and we had a joint account, of course. He wasn't at home often, 3 times a week at sports weekends too for over 25 years. In the last 4 years, he had eased up on sports, but had taken on 2 other activities that practically forced me to lock myself in my room most Friday nights so he could be with his buddies. Remember, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't hesitate to share it with your friends, family, and fellow adventurers in the YouTubeverse. As always, your comments and feedback mean